All right, let's just get right into it. Welcome to This Explainer, where today we're unpacking Kara Swisher's highly anticipated memoir, Burn Book, a tech love story. Now, this isn't just some dry retelling of tech history. Oh no, it's literally a front row ticket to the absolute wild, unprecedented rise of Silicon Valley. We're going to dive deep into the massive egos, the blinding ambitions, and honestly, the sometimes casual recklessness that actually forged this modern digital world we're all living in today. Swisher spent decades as a veteran tech journalist, and her perspective, it gives us an incredibly rare, unparalleled look behind the curtain.
To really wrap our heads around this story, we actually have to rewind a bit to the high-stakes energy of 1997. Picture this. Swisher had just made the pivotal decision to pack up and move to California to become the Wall Street Journal's first ever dedicated internet reporter. She described feeling like a literal gold prospector, arriving in a land of just immense, untapped opportunity. And this perfectly illustrates the mindset she carried with her. She was armed with this combative, frankly prophetic advice from veteran tech reporter Walt Mossberg, who told her, "Parachute in with your cleats on, cover them hard since they're going to run the world." Mossberg knew exactly what was coming, and Swisher, she took those words straight to heart.
So, let's look at part one, the digital revelation, from early drive to the internet boom.
To really get the fiercely independent and highly critical lens Swisher brought to tech journalism, we've got to look at our foundational journey. When Swisher was just 5 years old, her father suddenly passed away. It's a traumatic loss, right? But she describes how it instilled in her this profound sense of life's total unpredictability and a relentless drive to just keep going no matter what. Later on, a pretty difficult relationship with her stepfather in Princeton basically forced her to become super quick on her feet and a highly strategic thinker. Fast forward to Georgetown University, she's feeling totally out of place as a closeted lesbian, but she finally finds a sense of belonging in journalism. Writing as a stringer for the Washington Post gave her a real taste of media's power. But honestly, she felt confined by those traditional, old-school journalistic rules. She was looking for something way bigger.
And that something bigger hit her like an absolute lightning bolt during a revelation she had while at Duke University. She realized that, quite simply, everything that can be digitized will be digitized. I mean, think about that. While all her peers in traditional media were waving off the internet as just some passing fad, Swisher recognized its immense significance. She became deeply fascinated with the early pioneers, specifically Steve Case and AOL, who foresaw this whole future of connecting people online. She decided to dedicate her entire career to covering it, and her very first book ended up being about AOL.
Well, that early foresight led her directly into the absolute chaos of the manic.com boom. Swisher was observing this highly volatile landscape just packed with unsustainable business models. We're talking companies like Webvan and Cosmo.com that burned incredibly bright and then crashed incredibly hard, totally foreshadowing the devastating burst of the dot-com bubble. But the absolute peak of this era, which she points to as the climax of the internet's first revolution, was in 2000. That's when Steve Case's vision fully materialized with AOL acquiring Time Warner. Swisher boldly called this massive, unprecedented merger the heist of the century.
Moving into part two, profiling the tech titans, idealism versus ruthless reality.
As Swisher embedded herself in the valley to write her legendary profiles of its elite, she noticed this stark, often jarring contrast between two completely different archetypes of tech leadership. On one side, you have Jeff Bezos of Amazon. Swisher actually describes Bezos as feral. He had this absolutely relentless ambition that was hyper-focused on profits, systems, and distribution. He had a very hard-edged personality in those early days, which she notes was eventually softened a bit by his then-wife Mackenzie Scott. Now completely contrast that with Google's founders, Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Their company had this notoriously quirky, performative culture. But Swisher recognized early on that they were quietly building a database of human intentions, giving them unbelievable power. In fact, she accurately predicted Google's future dominance when she bluntly told Yahoo co-founder Jerry Yang to sever their search partnership with them. But despite their absolute brilliance, the Google founders were so unconventional that they famously had to bring in Eric Schmidt as CEO just to provide some adult supervision.
And she had these equally sharp observations on all the other key players. Take Steve Jobs at Apple. Swisher notes that Jobs totally mastered the art of melding creativity and science, but more importantly, he saw his core job as setting values, which eventually made him a massive media gatekeeper. She recounts this incredibly rare emotional conversation with Jobs in 2007 about his cancer diagnosis and how facing death really forces you to make the big choices in life. Then you've got Mark Andreessen of Netspace, who she found brilliant, sure, but highly immature, and Jerry Yang and David Filo of Yahoo, who just embodied this pure, youthful energy. But pay close attention to Mark Zuckerberg here. Swisher observed him as socially awkward, yes, but driven by this undeniable, crystal-clear ambition.
So this brings us to a crucial point: how Zuckerberg's famous early motto, "Move fast and break things," served as a massive glaring warning sign for Swisher. She saw this mantra as an open door for total irresponsibility. And unfortunately, her concerns were absolutely validated. She vividly recalls a conversation with Zuckerberg where she was utterly aghast at his seeming lack of understanding regarding the real-world dangers of Holocaust denial on his platform. This unchecked move-fast mentality led directly to Facebook's dangerous, outsized influence on things like the 2016 elections, widespread privacy violations, and the rapid spread of misinformation.
All right, Section 3, the pivot to accountability, changing paths and demanding answers. You see, as these tech behemoths grew exponentially more powerful, Swisher realized that simply sitting back and observing the industry just wasn't cutting it anymore. The stakes were getting way too high. Over time, her career underwent a fundamental evolution. She started out as a traditional reporter for the Wall Street Journal, just gathering the facts, but she soon morphed into a critical analyst, someone who wasn't afraid to use her platform to offer blunt and honestly, sometimes highly unwelcome opinions directly to these tech leaders. And finally, she became an independent advocate. She decided she needed to directly demand ethical accountability from an industry that was visibly starting to negatively impact society.
The real turning point for this shift happened in the year 2011. While she was traveling in Hong Kong, Swisher actually suffered a stroke. This terrifying health scare was a massive wake-up call for her. It completely solidified her desire to live life to the absolute fullest, to successfully balance motherhood with her demanding career, and to make the definitive decision to leave the safe confines of the Wall Street Journal, right alongside Walt Mossberg.
Following that realization, she felt this intense need to keep growing beyond the corporate limitations placed on her by News Corp. So she and Mossberg struck out on their own. They eventually launched Recode, which was a platform built specifically with a fierce focus on holding the tech industry strictly accountable. Now, as you can imagine, this unapologetic approach absolutely strained some of her deep industry relationships, but she knew it was totally necessary. Eventually, she sold Recode to Vox, which allowed her to expand her reach even further, and that led to the highly influential Recode Decode podcast, where she could engage in these long-form, combative, and super revealing conversations with tech's biggest names.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 4, Heuristics for the Future, Lessons from a Tech Love Story. By synthesizing decades of covering this manic landscape, Swisher arrived at a core set of guiding principles, or heuristics. First step, everything that can be digitized will be digitized. That was true in the 90s, and it's definitely true right now. Second, it's not about the technology, it's about everything else. The societal impacts matter far more than the actual code itself. Third, techies, and also media, inevitably lie. It's a harsh truth about PR and spin in the valley, but it's real. Fourth, technology requires humanity. Real, sustainable innovation cannot rely solely on profit and control. Being good is a constant, active task. And finally, my favorite, power does not last. No matter how invincible a company seems today, the landscape will eventually shift.
And that leads directly to her ultimate empowering plea. We cannot passively shrink away from the future. Swisher argues that it is on society, on us, not the machines, to dictate what happens next. We have to embrace technology responsibly. That means ensuring diverse voices from totally different backgrounds actually wield these tools. And, critically, it means going to the polls. We have to vote for officials who are actually willing to take the heat in Washington and regulate an industry that has operated without adult supervision for way, way too long. I really want to leave you with this incredible, provocative question that Swisher poses right at the end of her book. Looking at the immense power of modern tech, she asks, will we use it to warm our house rather than let those who did not care enough burn it down? It's a stark, powerful reminder that the choice is ultimately ours. We have to demand accountability. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helped you understand the arc of Silicon Valley a little bit better, and I'll catch you on the next one.